They kicked me out on my graduation night. Not softly, not quietly, just like they had thrown away a worn-out coat that no longer fit their plans. "You'll never amount to anything," my father had said, and my mother had only nodded, her eyes sharp as scissors, cutting through everything I thought I knew about love, family, and safety. 11 years ago, I left our house with nothing but a soaked gown, a suitcase, and a heart trying desperately to stay whole. I remember stepping onto the street, the rain mixing with tears, thinking only one thing: survive first, rise later. Being kicked out wasn't just a moment, it became a lens through which I would see the world for years. Every door I approached, every opportunity one chased, carried that echo, the words they spat out as though I were a mistake. But they were wrong. I was not a mistake, and that truth kept me moving forward, step by step, until it was no longer about proving them wrong, but about proving myself right. Grace, my younger sister, was the golden child in their eyes. Soft-spoken, wide-eyed, gifted at looking helpless exactly when they expected support. She never had to fight. She didn't have to shoulder the quiet burden of responsibility or fight to be seen. I watched her from the hallway most evenings, backpack on, straight-A report card clutched to my chest, invisible beneath the brilliance they showered on her. My achievements were expected. Hers were celebrated. My existence had been conditioned into quiet compliance. Hers had been gilded applause. I wasn't angry at first. Anger is exhausting for a child, and I had learned early that survival meant silencing yourself. I worked after school, weekends, nights, anything to earn my own way out of the house I called a cage. Every penny went into a small tin box hidden under my bed. It was my insurance, my secret plan to escape. The day my acceptance letter arrived, I didn't run home to show them. I cried in the parking lot of a grocery store where I had worked, my gown wrinkled and my fingers sticky from leftover frosting from my graduation party that had been thrown without me. Grace had balloons, cake, her family cheering her on. I had the letter in my hand and a silent vow in my heart. Someday they would see me, not as the failure they expected, but as the woman I was determined to become. Leaving wasn't easy. Every step away from that house carried a mixture of grief and relief. I avoided anything that might tether me to them. Photos, holidays, even the street where their clinic stood. And yet, I held my memories close, the sharp edges reminding me of the girl I'd been, and the woman I needed to grow into. Life outside that house was raw but honest. I made friends, found mentors, and discovered a rhythm that had nothing to do with their approval. Evan came into my life during those years, a light in the darkness. He didn't ask about my family at first, perhaps sensing the weight I carried. He noticed when I hadn't eaten, when I fell asleep on my notes, when I doubted myself quietly in the night. Love, I realized, could be patient, quiet and unassuming. And then came Liam, laughter and sticky fingers wrapped in innocence, reminding me that I could create a life without permission, a life worth living. For years, I avoided the past entirely, but the invitation changed everything. I remember holding it in my hands, feeling the weight of those 11 years, pressed down like a storm. My sister was getting married. 11 years. And here I was being invited, or perhaps testing them, seeing if they could ever acknowledge the child they had cast aside. I didn't know what I would feel walking into that ballroom. Fear, anger, triumph, or simply the calm of someone who had outlasted the storm. I started preparing quietly. My dress was modest but confident, the kind that whispered, "I am here," without needing to shout. I wanted to be seen, but on my terms. I packed Evan's reassuring words and Liam's small hand-holding like armor against the ghosts of my past. I rehearsed walking in, blending into the crowd, letting their eyes settle on me without knowing immediately who I was. But I also knew that eventually someone would see. Eventually, the truth I carried like a quiet flame for 11 years would ignite. Because no one kicks someone out for 11 years without leaving a mark, but no one can define what you become unless you allow them. And I wasn't allowing anyone to define me anymore. Not my parents, not Grace, not the whispers of judgment that had followed me across cities and years. I was ready to walk through the doors I had once been barred from, to see the faces of the people who had tried to erase me, and to stand tall, not in revenge, but in the quiet, undeniable truth of who I had become. And so, with Liam's hand in mine, Evan's steady presence behind me, and a heart tempered by survival, I stepped toward the invitation that had waited for 11 years, the invitation to a wedding, to confrontation, to revelation, and perhaps to closure. The rain of my graduation night had long since dried, but its memory lingered. Every step toward that ballroom felt like the culmination of 11 years of silent battles, quiet triumphs, and the slow, painstaking construction of a life that could not be kicked, erased, or broken. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just walking into a wedding. I was walking into the reckoning that had been waiting for me all these years. The doors of the ballroom loomed larger than I remembered, gilded with gold, polished to perfection, a space that had always seemed like it belonged to someone else, someone like Grace, the one who never had to fight for a corner of love or recognition. I paused for a heartbeat, smoothing the front of my dress, inhaling slowly. Evan rested a reassuring hand on my back, grounding me, while Liam clutched my fingers like a tiny anchor to the real, solid world. I stepped inside. The music swelled, a classical arrangement meant to feel joyful, but all I felt was the heat of eyes that didn't yet see me clearly. Guests drifted by in their suits and gowns, laughter floating through the air like delicate balloons. But I could feel the subtle shift, the imperceptible pause in conversation, the tilt of heads that hadn't yet registered my presence but were sensing it. Recognition doesn't always come immediately. Sometimes it simmers, like a quiet alarm, until someone finally notices. And then I saw her, Grace, my sister, the golden child, standing at the center of the room, radiant in white, her every movement measured and practiced. Her smile faltered the instant our eyes met, just for the briefest fraction of a second before she covered it with the calm poise of a bride who had rehearsed this day 1,000 times. I remembered that exact expression from years ago, the calculation that hid panic beneath softness, the rehearsed sweetness meant to disarm any observer. It was strange, almost surreal, to see her there, the same sister who had been my shadow in my mirror, now grown into someone whose life seemed polished and untouchable. But I knew better. I had spent 11 years out of that house, surviving, building, rising, and the girl they had kicked out had grown into a woman they had never expected to see again. My parents were the next to notice. Rowan's jaw clenched the moment he spotted me, and Elaine's hand flew to her necklace, a gesture I knew too well, a silent attempt to grab control over a situation they had never prepared for. They had kicked me out and thought they had erased me, but presence has a way of reminding the world that what was once ignored cannot be ignored forever. I didn't rush toward them. I didn't need to. I let the room adjust, let the whispers rise softly in the corners, the small, curious glances. It was quiet, almost imperceptible at first, the subtle stirrings of recognition, but I felt it in my bones. The moment someone noticed the weight I carried, the quiet confidence in my posture, the steady calm that came from surviving what they thought would break me. Then came Daniel, Grace's husband. Broad-shouldered, polished, the kind of man who studied the world analytically, measuring every reaction. His eyes flicked to me, scanning the familiar tension between me and the family, piecing together fragments of a story he hadn't yet been told. "You two know each other?" he asked, glancing from me to Grace, and then to her parents. The words landed in the air like a challenge, soft but sharp. Grace froze. My parents stiffened. And in that pregnant pause, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. A power that had nothing to do with confrontation or revenge, only with presence and truth. I smiled too well. The kind of smile that carries years of survival and quiet triumph. Daniel blinked, confused, unprepared for the weight behind my calm. I let my gaze wander, letting the room absorb me slowly. It was subtle, not loud. The recognition didn't come in shouts or accusations. It came in the small, involuntary gestures, the tightening of Grace's grip on her bouquet, the shift of Rowan's stance, the way Elaine's lips parted in an unplanned gasp. 11 years of being kicked out had taught me patience, and patience was working in my favor now. I moved through the room slowly, letting conversations resume around me, but noticing the changes. Doctors and colleagues who knew my professional reputation paused when their eyes registered my name. I had been underestimated by my family, erased from the story they told everyone else, but in the wider world, my accomplishments had left traces they couldn't ignore. Grace approached me, stepping carefully, her face attempting neutrality. "Adeline," she said softly, almost a whisper. It was the same name she had used when she wanted to summon me into a world of accountability I had long left behind. But I was no longer that girl, and she could feel it in the steady way I held my gaze. I bent slightly to Liam, murmuring, "Everything's okay, sweetie." His small hand gripped mine, and in that touch I felt the realness of my life, the life that couldn't be kicked, couldn't be erased. I let the tension build quietly, letting Grace, my parents, and Daniel absorb the presence of someone they had once believed lost. The air between us thickened with unspoken history, the decisions they had made, the words they had said, the years they thought had erased me. But I was here, alive, strong, and entirely unbroken. The ballroom shimmered with lights and whispers, but I moved forward, the weight of 11 years balanced lightly in my posture, and the quiet understanding settled in the room. The girl they had kicked out was no longer invisible. And somewhere deep inside me, I smiled again, because I knew this was only the beginning. Grace recovered faster than I expected. She always did. Years of being the favorite had trained her to regain control the moment it started slipping. She tilted her head, smoothed her veil, and let out a small laugh that sounded light enough to convince strangers, but not me. "We just haven't seen each other in a long time," she said to Daniel, tightening her grip on his arm, as if anchoring herself to the version of reality she'd rehearsed. Daniel didn't smile. He kept looking at me, not unkindly, but with the focused attention of someone trained to notice what didn't quite fit. 11 years is a long time," he said calmly. "You never mentioned an older sister." The words landed softly, but I saw the damage immediately. Grace's shoulders stiffened. My mother stepped in too quickly, the way people do when they're afraid silence might expose something. "This isn't the time," Elaine said. "Today is about family and celebration." I almost laughed at the irony. Family. The word had been used against me for years, when they needed obedience, when they wanted silence, when they kicked me out and called it discipline. Daniel glanced at her, then back at Grace. Why didn't I know? Grace swallowed. It just never came up. The lie hovered between us, thin and fragile. I said nothing. Silence had always been my strength. I had learned long ago that when people lie, the truth doesn't need to shout, it only needs to wait. A server passed with champagne. I took a glass, letting the cold stem steady my fingers. My father finally stepped forward, his voice low and controlled, the tone he used when he wanted authority without witnesses. "What are you trying to do, Adeline?" he asked. "This isn't the place." I met his eyes without flinching. "I'm not trying to do anything. I was invited." Daniel turned sharply toward him. "Invited?" "Yes," I said gently. "By your office. The invitation came weeks ago." Grace's face paled. That detail hadn't been part of her script. Daniel frowned. "You told me you handled everything yourself. The clinic, the family, that you stayed when no one else did." My pulse stayed steady. I could feel the shift now. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. The balance of power tipping quietly, like a scale finally finding its truth. Grace laughed again, but this time it cracked. "I mean I did. I've always been there." "For how long?" Daniel asked. "Since college, right?" Grace nodded quickly. "Yes." One of the guests nearby, a doctor from another hospital, tilted his head. "That's impressive," he said casually. "Which program did you complete?" Daniel mentioned Stanford once. Grace froze, just for a second, but Daniel saw it. "I did a specialized track," she said. The doctor frowned politely. "Interesting. I worked closely with Stanford administration for years. I don't recall that track." The silence thickened. My mother's hand trembled against her clutch. My father's jaw tightened. Daniel turned fully toward Grace now. "You've been lying to me." "No," she said too fast. "I just simplified things." I finally spoke. My voice was calm, almost soft. "You simplified me out of a story." Grace whipped around. "Why are you doing this?" she hissed under her breath. "Why now?" I leaned closer, my voice barely audible. "I didn't do anything. I walked in. Everything else is unraveling on its own." Her eyes flickered with something ugly. Fear, not guilt. Fear of being seen. Fear of losing what she'd built on my absence. Evan touched my elbow lightly. "You okay?" "I am," I said and meant it. Grace excused herself abruptly, heels clicking too fast for a bride. My mother followed, whispering urgently. My father lingered, glaring at me like I'd shattered something sacred. Daniel stayed. He watched them go, then looked at me again. "What's your side of the story?" I held his gaze. "The part where they kicked me out on my graduation night." He inhaled sharply. "They did what?" Rowan snapped. She was ungrateful. She refused to support the family. Daniel turned slowly toward him. "That's not what you told me." The doctor nearby cleared his throat, suddenly uncomfortable. I didn't press. I didn't explain. I didn't defend myself. I had spent years doing that alone. Tonight, the truth was walking for me. Grace returned moments later, eyes red, smile brittle. "Let's not do this here," she pleaded. Daniel looked at her, really looked. "Then when were you planning to tell me the truth?" She had no answer. I watched her then, not with anger, but with clarity. She hadn't stolen my life. She had borrowed it, poorly, and now the seams were showing. I realized something in that moment. Being kicked out hadn't ruined me. It had removed me from a system that only worked when I stayed small. And now, standing there, watching their story crack under the weight of its own lies, I understood. I wasn't here to expose them. I was here to witness the truth catching up. Grace fled toward the restroom, hallway like someone running from a fire she could no longer contain. Her heels echoed sharply against marble, too fast, too uneven. My mother hurried after her, whispering frantic reassurances that sounded more like instructions than comfort. My father stayed behind, frozen, his face carved from the same stubborn denial I'd grown up with. I waited a few seconds before following. Not because I was afraid, but because I wanted her to feel it. The absence. The moment where the story she'd built no longer protected her. The restroom hallway was quiet, removed from the music and forced laughter of the ballroom. Grace stood at the counter, gripping the marble, so hard her knuckles had gone white. Her reflection stared back at her like a stranger, eyes wide, breath shallow, makeup flawless but meaningless. When she saw me, she straightened instantly. "You had no right," she whispered, voice trembling with rage and panic. "No right to come here." "I was invited," I replied evenly. "You don't get to rewrite that." "You know what you're doing," she snapped. "You always did, making yourself look like the victim." I studied her calmly. I didn't make myself anything. They kicked me out. That part was real. She flinched, as if the words physically struck her. "You don't understand," she said quickly. "If I didn't say what I said, if I didn't let them believe those things about you, they would have compared us. They always did." My chest tightened, but my voice stayed steady. "They did compare us. That's why I was kicked out." Her breath hitched. For the first time, she didn't argue. "You were always smarter," she whispered, eyes glistening. Everyone noticed. Teachers, doctors, patients. Even Dad noticed. He just hated that he did. I felt something settle in my chest. Not vindication. Not triumph. Understanding. "So you erased me," I said softly. "I survived," she shot back. "I did what I had to." "So did I replied. "I just didn't lie about it." She reached for my arm, desperation seeping through her anger. "Please, don't say anything else out there. He can't find out everything." I gently removed her hand. "I haven't said anything. And that's what scares you." Her face crumpled then, the composure finally breaking. She slid into a chair, gown pooling around her like a fallen curtain. "If he knows the truth," she whispered, "he won't see me the same way." "That's not my fault," I said quietly. "That's the cost of building a life on lies." When we returned to the ballroom, the shift was undeniable. Conversations faltered, heads turned. The room no longer hummed, it held its breath. Daniel stood near the head table, arms crossed, eyes distant. My parents hovered beside him, whispering urgently. Grace walked back slowly, shoulders slumped, smile gone. A guest approached Daniel, a senior physician. "Congratulations," he said warmly. Then, glancing at Grace, "You managed the clinic for years, right?" Grace nodded stiffly. "And your role before that?" the man asked. She hesitated. "I helped run administrative operations," I said calmly from my seat. Every head turned. Daniel looked at me sharply. "You did?" "Yes," I said. "Before they kicked me out." The physician frowned. "That aligns with the records I remember." Grace's breath caught. My mother swayed slightly. My father opened his mouth, then closed it. Daniel turned slowly toward Grace. You told me you carried the clinic alone. I did, she whispered. You told me she left because she couldn't handle responsibility. Grace broke. I was afraid. The room fell silent. Daniel exhaled slowly. Afraid of what? Of losing you, she sobbed. Of them seeing her instead of me. I didn't move, didn't interrupt. The truth didn't need help anymore. Daniel stepped back, not far but far enough. You lied to me, he said quietly. About everything. Liam tugged my hand. Mom, why is everyone sad? I knelt beside him. Because some people told stories that couldn't last. Daniel turned to me. Is it true? Were you really kicked out? I met his eyes. On my graduation night, with a suitcase and a warning that I'd never be anything. My father snapped. Enough! Daniel looked at him sharply. Is it? Silence. That silence said everything. The wedding lights felt harsher now. Too bright. Too honest. Grace sat motionless, tears streaking her face. My parents stood exposed, stripped of control. I didn't feel revenge. I felt free, because the girl they kicked out had come back. Not to beg, not to accuse, but to stand still long enough for the truth to recognize itself. And this time, there was no hallway to hide in. The music never came back. The DJ stood frozen behind his booth, hands hovering uselessly above the controls, waiting for someone, anyone, to tell him what to do. No one did. The silence stretched until it felt heavier than sound ever could. Daniel cleared his throat. I need answers, he said, voice steady but strained. Not whispers. Not excuses. Right now. My mother stepped forward quickly, smoothing the front of her dress like she could press the truth back into place. This is not the time, she said. People are watching. That's exactly why it is, Daniel replied. Grace looked like she might faint. My father finally found his voice. We did what was best for the family. I let out a quiet laugh, soft, incredulous. You always say that right before someone gets erased. Head snapped toward me again. Daniel gestured toward a nearby table. Let's sit. No one argued. We gathered near the head table, guests pretending not to stare while absolutely staring. Glasses paused midair. Phones lowered, but not all the way. Daniel faced me. You said you were kicked out. Why? I took a slow breath. Because I refused to sign paperwork that transferred my patient research credits to Grace's name. A ripple went through the room. Grace shook her head wildly. That's not how it happened. It is, I said. The files exist. The emails too. Daniel's jaw tightened. You told me you built your career alone. I did. Grace cried. I stayed. I worked. She left. She was forced out, a calm voice said. We turned. Dr. Malik, our former department head, stood near the back of the room. I hadn't seen him yet. My stomach dropped. I recognized her the moment she walked in, he continued. I wondered when someone would ask. Daniel stood. You know her. I supervised her residency, he said. She was one of the most promising doctors we had. My mother paled. This is inappropriate. It's accurate, Dr. Malik replied coolly. She was removed after refusing to falsify records. A stunned silence followed. Grace whispered, You said those records were approved. They were not, Dr. Malik said. And when she refused to cooperate, your parents demanded she be dismissed quietly. They threatened the hospital's donors. Every word landed like a crack in glass. Daniel looked at Grace, pain flickering across his face. You knew. She sobbed openly now. I was young. I was scared. They told me it would pass. And it didn't, I said. It followed me for years. Daniel turned to my parents. You destroyed her career. My father straightened defensively. She could have stayed, if she'd just been reasonable. I laughed again, louder this time. Reasonable? You told me no one would ever marry a woman who embarrassed her family. Liam squeezed my hand. Dr. Malik spoke again. For what it's worth, she rebuilt herself. Abroad. Private practice. Independent research. Daniel's eyes snapped back to me. You're still practicing? Yes, I said. Happily. That word stung Grace the most. Daniel exhaled slowly. So you lied to me. You let me believe she was nothing. I didn't think it mattered anymore, Grace whispered. I thought she was gone. I stood. I was. And then you invited me. A murmur rippled through the guests. A few stood. Someone quietly left. Daniel removed his wedding ring. The sound of it hitting the table was soft, but final. "This wedding is on hold," he said clearly. "I won't marry into a lie." My mother gasped. "Daniel, think." "No," he cut in. "You think. All of you." Grace collapsed into the chair, sobbing. My father stared at the table, defeated. My mother looked at me with a mixture of fury and fear. "You did this," she hissed. "No," I said calmly. "You did. I just stopped disappearing." Daniel turned to me one last time. "I'm sorry for believing them." I nodded. "That's enough." I took Liam's hand and walked toward the exit. No one stopped me. Behind me, the perfect wedding dissolved into murmurs, tears, and broken illusions. The chandeliers still sparkled, but the room felt dim. Outside, the night air was cool and clean. Liam looked up at me. "Mom, are we in trouble?" I knelt beside him and smiled. "No, baby. We're finally out of it." And for the first time since I was 18, I believed it. I didn't look back when we reached the car. Not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to see them anymore to know who I was. Liam buckled himself in, unusually quiet. The venue lights faded behind us as we drove away, the road stretching forward like a promise that didn't need words. For 11 years, I had imagined this moment differently. I thought I'd scream. I thought I'd cry. I thought I'd demand apologies. Instead, I felt light, as if the weight that had been pressing on my chest since the day I was kicked out had finally lifted. That night, we stayed at a small hotel near the highway. Nothing fancy. Just clean sheets and silence. Liam fell asleep quickly. His face relaxed in a way I rarely saw after long days. I stood by the window and watched the city lights flicker. 11 years ago, I had stood by a very different window, my childhood bedroom, holding a packed bag while my mother told me I was no longer welcome. "You chose shame over family," she had said. Tonight, I chose myself. The next morning, my phone exploded. Missed calls, messages, unknown numbers. I didn't open them right away. We ate breakfast slowly. Pancakes, orange juice, Liam smiling again. Only after he was busy coloring did I finally check. Grace had sent 12 messages. The last one read, "I don't know who I am without the lies." I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. "I hope you find out, but not at my expense." Then I muted the thread. My parents tried next. My father left a voicemail. His voice sounded older than I remembered. We never meant for it to go that far. I deleted it, because intent doesn't erase impact. A week later, the fallout became public. The hospital launched an internal review. My old records resurfaced. Dr. Malik submitted his testimony formally. Grace was placed on indefinite leave, pending investigation. Daniel called me once. "I ended it," he said quietly. "Not just the wedding. Everything." "I know," I replied. "I wish I had listened sooner." "So do I said, not cruelly, just honestly. We said goodbye like two people who understood that timing can ruin even decent intentions. Life didn't magically become perfect after that, but it became honest. 3 months later, I received an official letter. An apology. Not emotional, not dramatic, but documented. My dismissal had been deemed unjust. My name was cleared. I sat at my kitchen table, the paper trembling slightly in my hands, and let myself cry, not from pain this time, but from release. Liam hugged me tightly. "Does this mean you won?" he asked. I smiled. "It means we survived." We moved shortly after. New city, new school, new routines. Sometimes, I'd catch myself waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting to be kicked out again. But it never came, because I had built something they couldn't take. One evening, months later, I ran into my mother at a grocery store. She looked smaller, older. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "You embarrassed us." I met her eyes calmly. "No, I exposed you." She swallowed hard. "You didn't have to destroy everything." I nodded. "Neither did you." I walked away before she could respond. And for once, my back didn't feel heavy with guilt. At home, I tucked Liam into bed. "Mom," he asked sleepily, "why did they kick you out?" I brushed his hair back gently. "Because they were afraid of who I'd become if I stayed." He thought about that, then smiled. "I'm glad you didn't." "So am I. Because being kicked out didn't break me. It redirected me. It stripped away illusions, forced me to rebuild, and taught me that family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by who doesn't abandon you when it's inconvenient. I showed up to my sister's wedding after 11 years. Not to beg, not to prove, not to take revenge, but to stand in the truth they tried to bury. And this time, when the doors closed behind me, I wasn't the one being kicked out. I was the one walking free.